The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber split open with a sound like thunder rolling across mountains. Ambassador Marcus Webb stepped through, and for a moment his legs nearly failed him. The chamber was impossible. It stretched upward for what looked like miles, a spiral of platforms rising into darkness, each one holding representatives from species humanity had only dreamed about months ago. Thousands of eyes turned toward him. Some were familiar, resembling Earth animals in strange ways. Others were configurations Marcus's brain struggled to process. Geometries that made his head ache if he looked too long. He was the only human in a room built for giants. The floor beneath his feet was transparent, revealing the void of space below. Stars drifted past in slow motion, and somewhere among them, too small to see from this distance, was Earth, home. 20 billion people who had no idea. Their entire future was being decided right now. Marcus forced himself to walk forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence. He'd been briefed for months about this moment. Earth's best diplomats had drilled him on protocol, on the careful dance of galactic politics, on the weight of every word he would speak here. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing alone before the power that governed half the known galaxy. A voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Human, you stand before the Galactic Council to answer for your species' actions. State your designation. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice sounded tiny in this space. Ambassador Marcus Webb, representing the United Earth Government. The Council acknowledges you. The speaker materialized from the shadows above, descending on a platform of light. It was the Quorum Prime, the being who served as the Council's voice. Marcus had seen images, but they hadn't captured the strangeness of it. The Prime looked like liquid metal given form, constantly shifting, never quite settling into a single shape. You are accused of violating the Preservation Accords, specifically the Third Edict concerning pre-emergent species. How does humanity answer? This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Marcus had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times, refining every word. But standing here, with the weight of civilizations pressing down on him, the prepared words felt hollow. He spoke the truth instead. 3 years ago, our deep space monitoring detected an anomaly, a solar flare building on a star in the Talos system. Our scientists calculated it would reach Class X90 intensity. Marcus paused, making sure his words reached every corner of this enormous space. The planet Talos 4 had intelligent life. 16 billion people living in cities, raising families, creating art and music, and all the things that make a civilization worth saving. They had no space travel, no way to detect what was coming, no way to escape. A ripple of movement passed through the assembled species. Translator devices whispered in 100 languages, but Marcus kept his focus on the Quorum Prime. We had a choice, Marcus continued. We could follow laws written before humanity existed, laws we never agreed to, and watch 16 billion people die. Or we could help them. You chose to interfere. The voice came from the upper tiers, sharp and crystalline. Marcus looked up to see one of the Velex delegation rising, their transparent body pulsing with angry red light. You gave them technology they had not earned. You altered their natural development. This is precisely why the Accords exist, to prevent young species from playing at being gods. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. We didn't play at anything. We saved lives. You doomed them to dependency. Another voice called out, this one buzzing like insects. Species that receive advanced technology before they are ready inevitably stagnate. You have destroyed their potential for true growth. They're alive to have that potential, Marcus shot back. That seems preferable to being dead. The Quorum Prime's form rippled. Ambassador Webb, the Council understands your species is young. You have been part of the galactic community for barely 2 of your years. Perhaps you do not yet grasp the complexity of what you have done. I understand perfectly. Marcus's voice carried more edge than he intended, but he was past caring about diplomatic niceties. I understand that this council watched a civilization face extinction and did nothing. I understand that your laws value process over life. And I understand that if following your rules means letting billions die when we have the power to save them, then humanity will break those rules every single time. Silence crashed down on the chamber. Marcus realized he might have just signed Earth's death warrant. But the words were out now, hanging in the air between him and the gathered powers of the galaxy. The Elef descended from the highest tier, beings of woven light so ancient that some species worshipped them as gods. When they spoke, their words bypassed sound entirely, appearing directly in Marcus's mind with uncomfortable clarity. Humanity displays the arrogance of all young species. You believe compassion justifies any action. You do not yet understand the damage such thinking causes across centuries and millennia. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the Elef continued. The Tylosian people were 43 years from achieving space flight through their own efforts. They would have detected the flare. They would have found a solution. Instead, you robbed them of that achievement. You made them dependent on human technology, human guidance, human charity. You have crippled them in ways you cannot yet comprehend. We gave them a chance to live, Marcus said quietly. Everything else is secondary to that, which is precisely why humanity cannot be trusted with unsupervised contact. The Quorum Prime's form shifted into something harder, more judicial. The Council has reviewed Earth's actions. We have consulted the Accords. There is only one appropriate response to such a violation. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment Earth's intelligence agencies had warned about. The moment when a young species learned that the galaxy was not a democracy, but a hierarchy enforced by beings who had ruled the stars for millennia. The Council invokes custodianship protocols, the Quorum Prime declared. Humanity will be placed under supervised governance for a period of no less than 3 standard centuries. During this time, all Earth decisions regarding interstellar contact, technology development, and expansion will require Council approval. Human vessels will be restricted to your home system. Human culture will be studied and guided toward more appropriate perspectives. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. 300 years. Entire generations born and dying under alien control. Earth reduced to a protectorate. Humanity's future decided by species who valued ancient laws over basic morality. You're making a mistake, Marcus said, his voice rough. We are preventing future mistakes, the Elef corrected. Humanity will learn, in time, to see the wisdom of the Accords. You will grow beyond this primitive need to act on emotion rather than reason. Marcus looked down through the transparent floor at the stars below. Somewhere out there was Earth, home, the planet he was about to fail. Then something changed. A sound filled the chamber, low and resonant, growing steadily louder. It shouldn't have been possible. The chamber was sealed against outside interference, protected by technology humanity barely understood. But the sound came anyway, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the air itself. Every display screen in the chamber flickered to life simultaneously. The Quorum Prime's form rippled with what might have been surprise or concern. On the screens, an image appeared. Space, stars, and ships. Hundreds of ships hanging in formation just beyond the chamber's defensive perimeter. Marcus stared at the screens, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Those weren't Council vessels. He'd studied every major fleet in the galaxy during his training. These ships were different, smaller, cruder, and he recognized the design. They were Tylosian. This is a violation of protocol, the Quorum Prime announced, its voice carrying an edge Marcus hadn't heard before. No military vessels are permitted within Honored Council. The voice came through every speaker, calm and clear, despite speaking a language the Talosians had learned only 3 years ago. This is Fleet Commander Reva of the Talosian Defense Force. We formally request permission to address this assembly. The chamber erupted. Hundreds of species began speaking at once, their voices crashing together into chaos. Marcus stood frozen in his column of light, watching the screens as Reva's image appeared. She was small by galactic standards, barely 4 feet tall, with copper-colored skin and 4 arms. But she carried herself like someone who commanded respect, like someone who had brought a fleet of warships to the galaxy's seat of power and expected to be heard. The Quorum Prime's voice cut through the noise. Fleet Commander Reva, the Talosian people hold observer status only. You have no standing to address this council, and your presence here with military vessels is an act of gratitude, Reva interrupted. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. 3 years ago, humanity saved my world. 16 billion Talosian lives exist today because one human ship captain chose compassion over compliance. We owe Earth a debt that can never be fully repaid. Marcus's throat tightened. He hadn't known any Talosians were here. Earth's intelligence had reported that Talos 4 was still recovering from the solar event, focusing on rebuilding rather than polity. CS, your gratitude is noted, the Vlex representative said, their bioluminescence flashing irritation. It does not change the law. The humans violated the preservation accords. They must face consequences. Then we will face them together. The words hung in the sudden silence. Marcus saw shock ripple through the assembled species. The Talosians, barely 3 years into their space age, were challenging the council. It was insane. It was suicide. Reva continued, her voice steady. If Earth falls under custodianship, the Talosian people declare we will recognize no council authority. We stand with humanity, whatever the cost. The Quorum Prime's form twisted into sharp angles. You threaten war against the council? Your species against the combined might of 200 civilizations? We threaten nothing, Reva said. We simply state fact. Humanity taught us that some principles matter more than survival. They showed us that watching suffering, when you have power to prevent, it is not wisdom. It is cowardice. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. The Talosians were risking everything. For Earth, for a species they barely knew. Because 3 years ago, one human captain had made the choice to save lives instead of following orders. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or military might. It was the simple, dangerous idea that compassion could be worth dying for. And the Talosians had learned that lesson well. The council chamber descended into chaos. 200 species began shouting at once, their voices colliding in a wave of sound that made Marcus's ears ring. The Quorum Prime's form flickered rapidly between shapes, a sign of distress Marcus had learned to recognize during his diplomatic training. On the massive display screens, Fleet Commander Reva stood motionless. Her 4 arms held in a position that Marcus guessed meant formal resolve in Talosian culture. The LF descended again, and this time their mental voice carried enough force to silence the room. This is unprecedented. A pre-emergent species threatening military action against the Council. Commander Reva, you understand that your fleet would be destroyed in minutes. Your civilization would cease to exist. We understand, Reva replied. Her 3 hearts beat visibly through her translucent chest plate, but her voice remained steady. We also understand that extinction is preferable to dishonor. The humans saved us when they had every reason to look away. We will not abandon them now. Marcus wanted to shout at her to stop, to take her ships and go home, to save her people from the disaster they were rushing toward. But he stood frozen in his column of light, a spectator to events spiraling beyond anyone's control. "The Council does not respond to threats," the Velex representative hissed. "Your loyalty is admirable but foolish. Withdraw your fleet, and we may show mercy to your ignorance." "No." The single word echoed through the chamber. Reva's image grew larger on the screens, her copper eyes fierce. "My people spent 43 years studying the stars, preparing for the day we could join the greater community. We dreamed of what we would find out here. Wisdom, justice, species working together for common good." She paused. "Instead, we find a council that values rules over lives. We find civilizations so old they have forgotten why laws exist in the first place. You dare lecture the council on law?" The voice came from the Krell sector, a species of crystalline beings who had maintained galactic order for 6,000 years. "We have guided the galaxy through ages of darkness. We have prevented wars that would have consumed entire spiral arms. The preservation accords exist because species like yours always believe they know better." "The accords exist," Reva countered, "because ancient civilizations grew comfortable. You found a system that worked for you and convinced yourselves it was the only possible system. But humanity showed us something different. They showed us that rules should serve life, not the other way around." Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and terror. The Talosians were saying everything he'd wanted to say, but couldn't, not without making things worse for Earth. But hearing it from Reva carried different weight. This wasn't humanity defending its own actions. This was another species, one the Council had expected to condemn Earth, instead standing witness to the value of what humanity had done. The quorum, Prime shifted into a form that resembled a judge's bench, ancient and imposing. "Fleet Commander Reva, your position is noted. However, this council has existed for 12,000 years. We have faced rebellions before. We have dealt with species who believe their moral certainty justified breaking universal law. None succeeded. Then we will be the first." A new voice cut through the tension, speaking Galactic Common with an accent Marcus didn't recognize. Perhaps not alone. Every head in the chamber turned. On a platform Marcus hadn't noticed before, partially hidden in shadow, stood a representative from the Drift Collective. They were a minor species, barely registering in galactic politics, known mostly for their skill at mining rare minerals from unstable asteroid fields. The representative was tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. "The Drift Collective stands with Talos and Earth," the representative said simply. Shock rippled through the assembly. The Quorum Prime's form flickered rapidly. "This is absurd. The Drift Collective has no stake in this matter. We have every stake." The representative's voice carried weight, despite their species' small numbers. 70 years ago, a human survey ship encountered one of our mining colonies during an asteroid collapse. They had no obligation to help. We were strangers, our species unknown to Earth, but they spent 3 days pulling our people from the rubble. 47 drift miners are alive today because humans chose compassion over convenience. Marcus's mind raced. He'd heard about that mission in the archives, a minor footnote in Earth's early exploration efforts. Captain Lisa Torres and her crew, who delayed their survey route to help an unknown species. It had seemed like basic decency at the time, nothing worth celebrating. Now that simple act of kindness had brought an ally to the council floor. 2 minor species, the Velex representative scoffed. "This changes nothing. The council's judgment stands. Does it?" Another voice, this one from the Morrow delegation. They were an aquatic species, rarely involved in council politics. Because the Morrow Collective also remembers human kindness. A medical ship that shared vaccine technology during our plague years, asking nothing in return. The humans could have traded that information for resources, for favor, for territory. Instead, they gave it freely. More voices rose from the chamber. A reptilian species from the outer rim, describing a human freighter that had towed their damaged colony ship to safety. An insectoid civilization, mentioning human agricultural techniques that had ended the famine. One by one, species Marcus had never heard Earth interact with stood to speak. Each one had a story. Each one had been touched by human compassion in some small way. And each one declared they would stand against the Council's judgment. The Quorum Prime's form collapsed into something chaotic, struggling to maintain coherence. This is orchestrated. The humans planned this. We planned nothing, Marcus said, finding his voice again. The words came out rough with emotion. We didn't even know half these species existed. We just helped when we could, because it was the right thing to do. Precisely the problem, the elf intoned. You act on impulse, on feeling, without considering consequences. This gathering proves it. You have created a coalition of minor species, all of whom now believe the galaxy should operate on sentiment rather than law. Maybe it should, Reva said quietly. Maybe law without compassion is just tyranny wearing a judge's robes. The chamber fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of that statement, the way it cut through 12,000 years of carefully maintained order. The Council had built the galaxy on rules, on structure, on the certainty that ancient wisdom knew best. And now dozens of species were suggesting that foundation might be flawed. This assembly is out of order, the Quorum Prime declared. We will adjourn for deliberation. All parties will. No. The Eleph's mental voice cut through everything else. This has gone beyond protocol. Fleet Commander Reva, you have brought warships to the Council's threshold. The species supporting Earth have made their positions clear. If we adjourn now, you will have time to coordinate, to strengthen this rebellion. That cannot be allowed. Marcus's blood ran cold. He knew what was coming. The Council invokes emergency powers, the Elef continued. All vessels in the vicinity are ordered to disperse immediately. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war. Earth's ambassador will be detained pending full investigation, and humanity will be placed under immediate custodianship, effective now. The screens showing Reva's fleet suddenly lit up with new contacts. Calm. Sill warships, hundreds of them, materializing from faster-than-light jumps. They surrounded the Talosian vessels in a perfect sphere, weapons charging with visible energy. You have 10 seconds to withdraw, the Quorum Prime stated. After that, we will open fire. Marcus watched Reva's face on the screen. Her expression didn't change, but her 3 hearts began beating faster. The biological stress response her species couldn't control. She was facing annihilation. Her entire fleet, her people's future, everything the Talosians had built in 3 short years of space travel. All of it about to end. Commander Reva, Marcus called out, his voice breaking. Please, take your people and go. Earth isn't worth this. Reva's eyes found his across the vast distance. With respect, Ambassador Webb, you don't get to decide what we're worth dying for. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The species who had spoken in Earth's defense began shouting protests. But the Council had made its decision. Examples had to be made. Order had to be maintained. 7, 6, 5. Marcus closed his eyes. He couldn't watch this. Couldn't witness the destruction of a civilization that had done nothing wrong except learn humanity's most dangerous lesson. 4, 3. Then a new sound filled the chamber. A sound that made the Quorum Prime's countdown stop. A sound that made every species in the assembly turn toward the main. VIEWPORT ships were emerging from faster-than-light travel. But not Council vessels. These ships were massive, ancient, their hulls scarred by centuries of use. They took positions around the Talosian fleet, creating a protective barrier between Ravish ships and the Council forces. Marcus opened his eyes. On the screens, he saw markings he recognized from historical archives. Symbols belonging to the Korvax Empire, one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. A species so powerful, they rarely bothered with council politics anymore. Not an image appeared on the displays, replacing Ravas. An elderly Korvax, their scaled face marked with the patterns of extreme age, looked out at the assembly with eyes that had seen millennia. "This is Elder Thane of the Korvax Empire," the figure said, their voice carrying the weight of ages. "The council will stand down." The Quorum Prime's form nearly disintegrated in shock. "The Korvax have not involved themselves in council affairs for 800 years. This matter does not concern your empire." "It concerns us greatly," Thane replied. "Because 400 years ago, when the Korvax faced our darkest hour, it was not the council who helped us. It was a single human ship, lost in space, carrying a crew who had every reason to fear us." The elder's eyes seemed to look directly at Marcus. "They gave us food when their own supplies were low. They shared medical knowledge that saved Korvax lives. They asked for nothing and expected nothing. And when they left, they changed how our entire empire viewed the younger species." Marcus's mind reeled. 400 years ago. That was before Earth had even established its first Mars colony. Before humanity had developed faster-than-light travel. A lost ship, so far from the records that Marcus had never heard of it. But the Korvax remembered. "The Council's judgment is rejected," Thane stated. "The Korvax Empire recognizes Earth as a sovereign species under our protection. Any action against humanity will be considered an action against the Korvax. Choose your next move carefully." The chamber exploded into chaos once more. But this time, Marcus saw something different in the reactions. Not anger, fear because the Korvax Empire had just declared that humanity's fate was worth going to war over. And if it came to war, even the Council couldn't be certain of victory. The standoff lasted for exactly 47 seconds. Marcus counted them, each one stretching like an hour, as Council warships faced Korvax vessels across the void, weapons charged and ready to turn this sector of space into a graveyard. The Tylosian fleet hung between them, small and vulnerable, while inside the chamber 200 species held their collective breath. The Quorum Prime broke first. Its liquid metal form collapsed inward, then rebuilt itself into something smaller, less imposing. "The Council requests clarification. Elder Thane, the Korvax Empire has maintained neutral status for 8 centuries. Your sudden involvement in human affairs is unprecedented." "Many things about humanity are unprecedented," Thane replied. The elderly Korvax shifted on the screen, their scales catching light in ways that suggested immense age. "You call them young and reckless. You accuse them of acting without wisdom. But I have studied their history. In their brief time among the stars, humanity has encountered 47 species. Of those, they have helped 32 without being asked. They have started 0 wars. They have violated only one law, and that law demanded they watch a civilization die." The Velix representative's bioluminescence pulsed angry crimson. "Their intentions are irrelevant. The preservation accords exist for a reason. If every species acted on emotion, the galaxy would collapse into chaos. Would it?" Thane's question hung in the air. "Or would we discover that compassion builds stronger bonds than law ever could?" Marcus watched as Elder Thane's image expanded to fill every screen in the chamber. Behind the Korvax Elder, Marcus could see the bridge of their flagship, a vessel so ancient its walls were covered in script from languages that no longer existed. Crew members moved in the background, their efficiency speaking to centuries of military precision. "The Council built this galaxy on a foundation of rules," Thane continued. You created the preservation accords to prevent interference. You established the custodianship protocols to control young species. You have maintained order for 12,000 years. The elder paused, and something like sadness crossed their scaled features. But you have also created a galaxy where civilizations watch each other die rather than risk breaking protocol, where laws matter more than lives, where the very concept of helping a stranger has become suspicious. Order requires sacrifice, the Aleph stated, their woven light forms descending to eye level with the screens. You of all species should understand this. Elder Thane, the Korvax Empire has existed for 6,000 years because you learned to value stability over sentiment. We learned to value survival, Thane corrected. And 400 years ago, we learned something else. We learned that sometimes the universe sends you teachers wearing unexpected faces. On the screens, the view shifted. Archive footage began playing, grainy and old, showing a human ship that looked nothing like modern Earth vessels. It was crude, barely more than a metal cylinder with primitive rocket engines. The ship drifted in space, clearly damaged, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. Marcus recognized the design from history classes. An early generation Earthship, one of the desperate missions launched before humanity had figured out proper faster-than-light travel. They'd sent dozens of these vessels into the void, hoping to reach distant stars, knowing most would never return. The IS Wanderer, Thane narrated. Lost in space, crew dying, systems failing. They encountered a Korvax research station in the outer drift. This was during our isolationist period. Our standing orders were to avoid all contact with unknown species. The footage showed the human ship approaching the Korvax station. Marcus could see the desperation in every maneuver, the way the vessel lurched and stuttered, barely maintaining trajectory. The station commander followed protocol, Thane continued. He sent warning signals, told the humans to stay away. But the ship was dying. So the station commander faced a choice. Follow ancient Korvax law and watch them perish, or violate direct orders to save alien lives. New footage appeared. Korvax in environmental suits, tethering the human vessel, pulling survivors through airlocks. 17 humans stumbling into the station, their suits patched and failing. Their faces showing the exhaustion of people who had been dying by inches for weeks. Commander Vex chose compassion, Thane said. He saved all 17 crew members. He gave them food, medicine, supplies. He repaired their ship well enough to limp home. And for this act of mercy, he was court-martialed by Korvax High Command. Marcus saw shock ripple through the council chamber. Even the Eleph's woven forms flickered with what might have been surprise. Commander Vex was stripped of rank and exiled, Thane continued. The Korvax Empire declared his actions a shameful violation of protocol. We erased his name from official records. We pretended the incident never happened. The Elder's voice grew heavy. And then, 200 years later, when the Korvax faced extinction from a quantum plague that our science couldn't cure, a human medical ship arrived at our borders. The footage changed again. A sleek Earth vessel, modern and efficient, holding position outside Korvax space. A transmission played, the voice speaking accented but clear Korvax. This is Dr. Helena Price of the Earth Medical Service. We've heard about the plague affecting your empire. We have research that might help. We're offering it freely, no conditions, no payment required. Because 200 years ago, a Korvax named Vex saved 17 human lives when he had every reason not to. We remember. And we always pay our debts. Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. He'd known about the medical mission, about Earth's contribution to curing the Korvax plague. But he hadn't known about the connection, about the thread of compassion stretching across 2 centuries, binding 2 civilizations together through simple acts of decency. Dr. Price's research saved 8 billion Korvax lives, Thane stated. Her team worked beside our scientists for 3 years, asking nothing in return. When we offered payment, territory, technology, she refused everything. She said humanity was simply returning a favor. The Elder's eyes seemed to bore through the screens. That is when the Korvax Empire understood. We had punished Vex for possessing the very quality that would one day save our entire species. We had called compassion a weakness, when it was actually the strongest force in the galaxy. The chamber remained silent. Marcus could see council members shifting uncomfortably, their certainty beginning to crack. So yes, Thane continued, the Korvax Empire will stand with humanity. Not because they are powerful, not because they offer us advantage, but because they have proven, again and again, that they value life over law, that they will sacrifice their own comfort to help strangers, that they possess the one quality this council seems to have forgotten in its 12,000 years of rule. And what quality is that? The Quorum Prime asked quietly. Kindness, Thane said simply. The courage to care when caring costs you something. Movement caught Marcus's attention. On the lower tiers of the chamber, species were standing. Not the major powers, not the Council's core members, but the smaller civilizations. The ones who rarely spoke, who generally followed the majority, who had learned to survive by staying quiet. One by one, they declared their support for Earth. Each had a story. A human trade ship that had warned them about pirates. A research team that had shared discoveries. A medical worker who had stayed behind during an epidemic. Acts so small they barely registered in official records. Moments of casual kindness that humans had probably forgotten within days, but the recipients had remembered. And now they were standing up to the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, risking everything, because humanity had shown them that some things mattered more than safety. The Quorum Prime's form began to destabilize, shifting rapidly between shapes as if searching for something solid to hold on to. This is madness. You would tear apart 12,000 years of order for a species you barely know? We know them well enough, Thane replied. Better than you do, apparently. You see humans as young and reckless. We see them as what the galaxy could be if we remembered why civilization exists in the first place. The Elef descended fully now, their woven light forms filling the center of the chamber with uncomfortable brilliance. You speak of compassion and kindness. Noble words. But the preservation accords were written in blood. Elder Thane, they were created after the intervention wars, when species thought they could save each other, and instead triggered cascading collapses across entire sectors. The humans violated those accords. They must face consequences. Then we all face consequences together, Reva's voice cut in. The Tylosian commander's image returned to the screens, her forearms spread in a gesture of absolute resolve. Because if the Council punishes Earth for saving my people, they declare that the Accords value death over life. And I will not serve a galactic order built on such a foundation. More species stood. More voices joined the chorus. The Drift Collective. The Morrow Collective. Dozens of civilizations Marcus had never heard of, all speaking in unity, all declaring that they would rather face the Council's wrath than accept its judgment of humanity. Marcus looked around the chamber and saw something extraordinary happening. The species supporting Earth weren't the powerful ones. They weren't the ancient empires or the military giants. They were the small civilizations, the struggling colonies, the overlooked and underestimated. They were the ones humanity had helped without expecting anything in return. The ones who remembered every act of kindness, because kindness, in a galaxy ruled by law and protocol, had become rare enough to treasure. The Quorum Prime's voice, when it finally spoke again, carried a weight Marcus hadn't heard before. Not anger, not authority. Something else. Something that might have been fear. This assembly will recess for emergency deliberation. All parties will maintain current positions. Any movement will be considered hostile action. The screens went dark. The chamber lights dimmed. And Marcus stood alone in his column of light, watching the stars drift past below, wondering if humanity had just started a war or sparked a revolution. Outside, in the cold vacuum of space, 3 fleets held their positions. Council ships, Korvax vessels, Telosian defenders, and scattered among them, smaller ships from dozens of minor species, all carrying the same message. Earth had shown them a different way to be, and now they were willing to fight for it. The question was whether the Council would choose wisdom or war, and Marcus suspected the answer would change the galaxy forever, one way or another. The emergency recess lasted 6 hours. Marcus spent them in a holding chamber adjacent to the main assembly, a room with walls that shifted between transparency and opacity, depending on some mechanism he couldn't understand. Sometimes he could see stars. Sometimes he saw only his own reflection staring back at him, looking far more haggard than he remembered. Guards stood at the entrance, members of the Krell species, whose crystalline bodies refracted light in dizzying patterns. They hadn't spoken to him, hadn't responded to his questions. They simply stood, patient and immovable, while somewhere beyond these walls, the fate of humanity was being decided. Marcus tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Fleet Commander Reva's face, saw the Tylosian ships surrounded by Council weapons, saw the moment when kindness might have triggered the largest war the galaxy had known in millennia. A chime sounded. The walls went transparent, revealing one of the Krell guards approaching. Ambassador Webb, the Council reconvenes. You will return to the chamber. Marcus stood, his legs stiff from sitting. Has a decision been made? The guard's crystalline face was impossible to read. The Council will announce its judgment. They walked through corridors that seemed to shift and change, never quite following the same path twice. Marcus had given up trying to understand the station's geometry. It was built by species who thought in dimensions humans barely comprehended, and expecting it to make sense was futile. The massive doors opened again. Marcus stepped through into chaos. The chamber had changed. The neat tiers of delegates were no longer orderly. Species had moved, forming clear divisions across the assembly. On one side, the traditional council powers, the civilizations who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. On the other, a loose coalition of smaller species, with the Korvax Empire's delegation standing at their head like a shield. And in the center, in the column of light where Marcus had stood before, was someone new. The figure was human, or had been once. Now they were something else, something Marcus's mind struggled to categorize. Their body was partially translucent, showing internal systems that glowed with soft blue light. Cybernetic enhancements covered their limbs, ancient and intricate. They looked simultaneously fragile and indestructible, young and impossibly old. Ambassador Webb, the Quorum Prime's voice announced. You will take your position beside Envoy Cross. Marcus moved forward, his confusion obvious. He'd never heard of an Envoy Cross. Earth's diplomatic corps had sent him alone, their only representative qualified for Council protocol. As he approached, the figure turned. Their eyes were fully human, warm brown and filled with something that looked like amusement. Hello, Marcus, they said, their voice carrying an accent from Earth's past, from regions that no longer existed after the climate wars. I'm sorry, we couldn't brief you earlier. Security concerns. Who are you? Marcus whispered. Captain Jonathan Cross, the figure replied. No, I haven't used that rank in about 370 years. They smiled, and for a moment looked almost normal, almost like someone Marcus might have passed on a street back home. I'm the reason this whole mess started. Understanding crashed over Marcus like a wave. You were on the Wanderer. You're one of the 17 crew members the Korvax saved. The only one still alive, Cross confirmed. Turns out that when you spend enough time with species whose lifespans measure in millennia, you pick up some useful medical technology. The Korvax offered to extend my life after I helped with the plague cure. Seemed rude to refuse. The Quorum Prime's form shifted impatiently. This assembly will come to order. Envoy Cross, you have requested to speak. The Council grants you this privilege, though your status as both human and Korvax citizen creates unprecedented complications. Cross stepped forward. Their movements fluid despite the obvious weight of their cybernetic enhancements. Thank you, Quorum Prime. I'll try to keep this simple. They turned, addressing the entire chamber. I've lived for 406 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched species evolve and adapt. I've served as a mediator, a researcher, and occasionally as a reminder that humans have been part of this galaxy longer than most of you realize. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Cross continued, their voice gaining strength. I was there when the Preservation Accords were last amended, 200 years ago. I argued against the Third Edict, the one that forbids interference with pre-emergent species. I lost that argument. The Count. Syl decided that law was more important than flexibility, that protocol mattered more than context. Cross paused, their enhanced eyes sweeping across the gathered species. I wonder if you remember why you made that choice. The intervention wars, the Elf stated. Species attempting to save each other created cascading failures across 17 sectors. Billions died because of misguided compassion. Billions died because of arrogance, Cross corrected. The species doing the intervening thought they knew better than the ones they were helping. They imposed solutions without asking questions. They treated developing civilizations like children who needed guidance rather than equals who needed support. Cross gestured toward the screens showing Talos 4. Is that what Earth did? Silence answered them. I've read the reports, Cross continued. I've examined every detail of humanity's contact with the Talosian people. Earth detected the solar flare. They calculated the danger. They reached out to Talos 4 and asked permission to help. They offered technology, but also training, ensuring the Talosians understood what they were receiving. They stayed for 2 years, working alongside Talosian scientists, sharing knowledge as partners rather than saviors. Cross's voice hardened. That's not intervention. That's cooperation. And if the Council can't see the difference, then perhaps the Council has forgotten what civilization means. The Valex representative rose, bioluminescence flashing. You speak as if humanity is special, as if their methods somehow justify breaking sacred law. I speak as someone who has watched humanity for 4 centuries, Cross replied. And yes, they are special. Not because they're better than other species, but because they haven't had time to forget what matters. They're young enough to still believe that suffering is worth preventing. They're naive enough to think that rules should serve people rather than the other way around. Cross smiled sadly. Give them another few thousand years, and maybe they'll become as rigid as the rest of you. But right now, in this moment, they remember something you've all forgotten. And what is that? The Quorum Prime asked. That laws are tools, not gods, Cross said simply. They exist to help civilizations flourish, not to make us comfortable while we watch each other die. Movement rippled through the chamber. Marcus saw it spreading from the smaller species. The ones who had declared support for Earth. They were standing again, but this time with more confidence. As if Cross's words had given voice to something they felt, but couldn't articulate. The Elf descended. their woven light forms pulsing with what Marcus had learned to recognize as intense focus. Envoy Cross, you propose abandoning 12,000 years of legal framework on the basis that humanity's emotional responses are somehow superior to accumulated wisdom. I propose, Cross said carefully, that the galaxy has changed since the Accords were written. You created those laws during an age of expansion and conflict, when species were competing for resources and territory. But that age is over. The galaxy is mapped. Borders are established. We're not fighting for survival anymore. We're just maintaining systems because they're familiar. Cross moved closer to the Elf, their cybernetic enhancements whirring softly. Tell me, honored Elf, when was the last time the Council faced a genuine crisis? When was the last time you had to make a choice where lives hung in the balance? The Elf's forms flickered. The Council prevents crisis through careful governance. The Council prevents crisis by avoiding risk, Cross countered. You've created a galaxy where nothing changes because change is dangerous, where helping a neighbor is illegal because it might cause complications, where compassion is suspicious because it disrupts order. They spread their arms, taking in the entire chamber. Is this really the best we can do? Is this the pinnacle of galactic civilization? Marcus watched as Cross's words landed like bombs throughout the assembly. He could see council members shifting, their certainty cracking. Even the Quorum Prime's form seemed less stable, flickering between shapes with increasing rapidity. Then the unexpected happened. One of the Krell representatives stood, their crystalline body catching light in sharp angles. The Krell were council loyalists, had been for 6,000 years. They never broke ranks, never questioned protocol. Envoy Cross speaks uncomfortable truth, the Krell said, their voice like ice cracking. The Krell have followed council law since before many species achieved spaceflight. We have been the council's enforcers, its judges, its unwavering support. They paused, and something in their crystalline structure seemed to shift. But we remember a time before the council. We remember when Krell civilization was young, struggling, facing extinction from a solar event not unlike the one that threatened Talos 4. Marcus held his breath. He'd never heard this story. An ancient species helped us, the Krell continued. They gave us the knowledge to save ourselves. They violated no law because the preservation accords did not yet exist. They simply saw suffering and chose to prevent it. The Krell's form seemed to grow brighter. We built our entire civilization on the foundation of that kindness. We joined the council to honor what we had been given. But somewhere across the millennia, we forgot that our very existence is proof that intervention can work. The chamber erupted again, but this time with a different quality. Not anger, not fear. Something closer to revelation, as if a truth too large to see had suddenly become visible. More species began to speak. More stories emerged. The galaxy, it turned out, was built on a foundation of small kindnesses, ancient debts, moments when someone had chosen compassion over protocol. The Preservation Accords had tried to prevent future mistakes by outlawing the very behavior that had allowed most civilizations to survive their early centuries. The Quorum Prime's form collapsed entirely, becoming a pool of liquid metal on its platform. It was the most extreme distress response Marcus had seen. Around the chamber, council representatives were arguing among themselves, alliances fracturing, certainties dissolving. Cross turned to Marcus, their expression gentle. This was always going to happen. The council built its authority on the assumption that ancient wisdom was always superior to young idealism. But you can't sustain a system like that forever. Eventually, someone has to ask the hard questions. And you knew humanity would be that someone? Marcus asked. I hoped you would be, Cross corrected. I've been watching Earth for centuries, waiting to see if you'd keep your compassion or lose it as you grew older. When you saved the Talosians, I knew it was time. They smiled. Time to remind the galaxy what it's forgotten. Time to show the Council that laws without wisdom are just chains wearing noble names. The Eleph's mental voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Enough. This assembly has deteriorated beyond productive deliberation. The Council requires time to process what has been revealed. We will adjourn for no. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonant and absolute. Every screen in the chamber lit up with the same image. Elder Thane of the Korvax Empire, but not alone this time. Behind them stood representatives from 30 other species, all wearing expressions of grim determination. The time for deliberation is over, Thane stated. The species gathered here propose a formal vote, not on whether to punish Earth, but on whether the Preservation Accords, as currently written, serve the galaxy's highest interests, or simply its oldest fears. Marcus felt the weight of that moment settle over him like gravity, increasing tenfold. A vote to change the Accords. A vote that would reshape how the galaxy functioned. A vote that could tear the Council apart or forge it into something new. And it was all happening because humanity had chosen kindness over compliance. The Quorum. Prime reformed slowly, taking on a shape Marcus hadn't seen before, something ancient and uncertain. Such a vote requires unanimous Council agreement to even proceed. Then let us see, Thane replied, how many species still believe in the Council's wisdom, and how many are ready to try something different. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if 12,000 years of order would stand, or if compassion would finally be allowed to write new laws. The vote took 3 days. 3 days during which the galaxy learned to hold its breath, during which fleets maintained their positions in tense standoffs, during which civilizations looked inward and asked themselves what they truly valued. Marcus watched it all from the observation deck of the Korvax flagship, where Elder Thane had invited him to wait out the deliberations. The deck offered a view of the Council chamber floating in its protective sphere, surrounded by more ships than Marcus had ever seen in one place. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of species, all waiting to see if the galaxy would change or stay frozen in ancient certainty. Captain Cross stood beside him, their cybernetic enhancements humming softly in the quiet. I've seen the Council vote on amendments before, they said. Usually it's unanimous within hours. This level of division hasn't happened in my lifetime. That's a long lifetime, Marcus observed. Cross smiled. Long enough to know that real change always feels impossible. Until suddenly it isn't. On the third day, the summons came. All delegates were to return to the chamber. The Council had reached a decision. Marcus walked through those shifting corridors again, but this time he wasn't alone. Cross walked on his left, Elder Thane on his right, and behind them came representatives from the 30 species who had declared their support for Earth. They moved together, like a delegation, like a unified force, and Marcus felt the weight of their solidarity pressing against his shoulders. The chamber doors opened. The assembly was waiting, every species in their designated positions, but the atmosphere had changed. The rigid hierarchy Marcus had felt during his first appearance seemed looser now, less certain of itself. The Quorum Prime took its place at the center, its liquid metal form more stable than it had been during the chaos of the previous session. This assembly will come to order. The Council has deliberated on the proposal to amend the Preservation Accords. We have heard arguments from all sides. We have examined our history and our values. We have asked ourselves what the galaxy needs versus what we have convinced ourselves the galaxy requires. Marcus's heart hammered. He couldn't read the Quorum Prime's tone, couldn't tell if this was leading toward acceptance or rejection. The vote was not unanimous, the Quorum Prime continued. In fact, it was the closest decision in Council history. Of the 200 member species, 98 voted to maintain the accords as written. 97 voted to amend them. A murmur ran through the chamber. Marcus did the math quickly. That left 5 species unaccounted for. 5 delegations abstained, the Quorum Prime explained. Unable to choose between tradition and change, they removed themselves from the decision. Under council law, abstentions are not counted toward the final tally, which means the vote to amend the preservation accords has failed by a single vote. Marcus felt his legs go weak. So close, they'd come so close to changing everything, and fallen short by the narrowest possible margin. However, the Quorum Prime's voice cut through his despair. The council recognizes that a decision this divided cannot stand as definitive. When half the galaxy questions your judgment, pretending you have absolute authority becomes foolish. The Elef descended from their high tier. Their woven light forms dimmer than Marcus remembered, as if the debate had cost them some essential energy. The council proposes a compromise. The preservation accords will stand, but with significant modifications. On every screen in the chamber, text began appearing in dozens of languages. Marcus's translator automatically rendered it into English, and he read the words with growing disbelief. The third edict will be amended. The Elef's mental voice explained, to allow for humanitarian intervention under specific circumstances. Species facing extinction-level events may be assisted if 3 conditions are met. First, the intervention must be requested or approved by the affected species leadership. Second, the assistance must be limited to the immediate crisis. Third, the helping species must provide education and partnership rather than dependency. Marcus looked at Cross, who was reading the same text with an expression of quiet satisfaction. That's exactly what Earth did with Talos, Marcus whispered. Exactly, Cross confirmed. They're not just allowing it. They're codifying it, making it the standard. The Quorum Prime continued. Additionally, the Council will establish a new body, the Compassionate Aid Directive, responsible for evaluating requests for intervention and ensuring they meet the amended standards. This body will be composed of representatives from both established powers and younger species, ensuring diverse perspectives guide all decisions. More text appeared. Details about the new directive, about oversight mechanisms, about safeguards to prevent abuse. But underneath all the bureaucratic language, Marcus could see the core truth. The galaxy was changing. The rigid structure that had governed for 12,000 years was learning to bend. As for Earth, the Quorum Prime's form shifted into something that might have been conciliatory. The charge of violating the preservation accords is dismissed. Humanity acted in accordance with principles that the Council now recognizes as valid. There will be no custodianship, no restrictions. Earth remains a sovereign species with full rights and privileges. The chamber erupted, not with anger this time, but with something that sounded almost like celebration. Species were standing, speaking over each other, their voices carrying relief and excitement and the peculiar energy of people who had just witnessed History.Fleet. Commander Rava's image appeared on the screens, broadcast from her ship. Her 3 hearts were visible through her chest plate, beating rapidly. The Talosian people thanked the Council for its wisdom. We are honored to have played a role in this change. The honor is shared, the Elef replied. And Marcus heard something in their mental voice he'd never expected to hear from being so ancient: humility. The Talosian people and their human allies have taught the Council an important lesson. That wisdom is not the exclusive property of age. That compassion is not weakness. That laws should evolve as our understanding deepens. Elder Thanes stepped forward, their scaled face showing satisfaction. The Korvax Empire recognizes the Council's decision. We withdraw our protection of Earth, as it is no longer necessary. But we extend an offer of alliance to humanity, based not on need, but on mutual respect and shared values. More offers followed. Species Marcus had never heard of, civilizations from across the galaxy, all extending friendship to Earth, some because humanity had helped them directly, others because they admired what Earth had stood for, a few simply because they wanted to be associated with the species. Brave enough to challenge the Council and win, Marcus stood there, overwhelmed, watching humanity's position in the galaxy transform before his eyes. Earth had come to this chamber as a defendant, facing subjugation and loss of sovereignty. Now they were leaving as something else entirely. Not rulers, not conquerors, but something that might be more valuable in the long run. A symbol. A reminder to the galaxy of what really mattered. The Quorum Prime's voice brought order back to the chamber. Ambassador Webb, the Council recognizes that you came here expecting judgment. Instead, you have helped reshape how this galaxy operates. Humanity should be proud. Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. We just tried to do the right thing. Yes, the Quorum Prime agreed. And sometimes, that is exactly what the galaxy needs. Someone willing to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. The session adjourned. Delegates began filing out, many stopping to speak with Marcus, to offer congratulations or ask questions about Earth's perspective on various issues. He answered as best he could, his mind still reeling from how quickly everything had changed. Cross touched his shoulder gently. Come on, let's get you back to Earth. You've got a lot of people waiting to hear how this turned out. They walked through the corridors together, Elder Thane accompanying them to the docking bay where Earth's shuttle waited. Around them, the station buzzed with activity, species discussing the new amendments, debating what they meant for their civilizations. You know this isn't over, Thane said as they reached the shuttle. Changing laws is one thing. Changing hearts and minds takes generations. There will be species who resist this, who cling to the old ways. I know, Marcus replied. But we made a start. More than that, Cross interjected. You reminded everyone that change is possible, that even the oldest, most entrenched systems can adapt. That's worth more than any single law. Marcus looked back toward the chamber one last time. Through the transparent walls of the station, he could see the Talosian fleet beginning to withdraw, their mission accomplished. He thought about Reva and her people, about the choice they'd made to stand with Earth against impossible odds. They were willing to die for us, Marcus said quietly. People we'd known for 3 years. They brought warships to the Council's doorstep and dared them to act. Because you saved them first, Thane reminded him. Because when they needed help, humanity didn't calculate the cost or worry about the rules. You just helped. That kind of action echoes across time, Ambassador Webb. It creates bonds that can reshape galaxies. The shuttle lifted off, carrying Marcus back toward Earth's diplomatic vessel. As they rose above the station, he could see the entire assembled fleet. Dozens of species all gathered because of what humanity had done. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through simple, persistent kindness. The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks. Marcus spent most of it writing reports, briefing Earth's government on everything that had happened, preparing for the diplomatic avalanche that was about to hit his planet. Elder Thane had been right. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. But when Earth came into view, that blue marble hanging in the black, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Whatever came next, humanity would face it with allies, with species who had learned to trust them, with a galaxy that was slowly, reluctantly, remembering that compassion wasn't weakness. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, landing at the diplomatic complex outside Geneva. Marcus stepped out into sunshine and breathable air, after weeks of recycled atmosphere and artificial light. A crowd waited for him, officials and reporters and ordinary people who had followed the news from the Yacht. Council chamber. They wanted to know what happened. They wanted to hear how humanity had faced the galaxy's judgment and emerged not just unscathed, but transformed. They wanted to understand how Earth, the youngest species in the Council, had managed to change laws that had stood for 12,000 years. Marcus looked at them and smiled. "We reminded them of something they'd forgotten," he said simply. "We showed them that the galaxy is bigger than its rules. That compassion isn't just an emotion, it's a strategy. That helping each other isn't weakness, it's how civilizations survive." In orbit above Earth, ships began arriving. Talosian vessels bringing delegations to establish formal relations. Korvax cruisers offering technological exchanges. Smaller ships from species Marcus had never heard of. All coming to meet the humans who had changed the galaxy by, refusing to watch their neighbors die. Earth had entered the galactic stage as supplicants, hoping for acceptance. Now they stood as something different. Not rulers, not conquerors, but teachers of a lesson the galaxy had needed to learn, that in the cold math of interstellar politics, in the vast machinery of galactic governance, in the ancient certainties of civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia, there was still room for something simple and powerful and true. There was still room for kindness. And sometimes, kindness was the most revolutionary force in the universe. In the weeks that followed, the Compassionate Aid Directive began its work. Species that had been watching neighbors struggle began reaching out. Young civilizations facing crises received help from unexpected sources. The rigid barriers between species began to soften, just a little, as the galaxy learned to value cooperation over isolation. The Preservation Accords still stood, but they had changed. They had learned to bend. And in learning to bend, they had become stronger, more resilient, more capable of serving the galaxy they were meant to protect. Marcus watched it all from Earth. From his small office where he processed the endless stream of diplomatic requests and alliance proposals. Sometimes he thought about that moment in the council chamber, standing alone before 200 species, certain that humanity was about to lose everything. They hadn't lost. They'd won something more valuable than sovereignty or territory or power. They'd won the right to be who they were, to keep helping, to keep caring, to keep choosing compassion, even when it cost them. Because in the end, that was what made humanity special. Not superior, not better, just different enough to remind the galaxy that there were other ways to be, other values to embrace, other futures to build. And if that was humanity's gift to the stars, Marcus thought it was a gift worth giving. The galaxy had learned to help each other again. And it all started because one species refused to watch 16 billion people die. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness change everything. Sometimes, they change the entire galaxy.